This is Just a Few Questions. I'm Marc Sims. My guest is LeAlan Jones. Welcome to the show, LeAlan Jones.
Thanks for having me, Mark. How are you doing? Happy New Year.
Man, I'm so happy that you're here. Before we get going, I was looking at your LinkedIn page and it says Matrix Muscle Training. What is that?
Well, I work with student athletes, and I help develop them mentally and physically to be able to transform their physical skill sets and uh, their mental intensity and turn it into opportunities that could lead to them being college athletes. So I work with a number of athletes across a number of sports, and I've been doing it for years, and it's something that's taken off more recently because of what's been going on with college sports and NIL, and I try to lower the barrier of entry for student athletes and for families of student athletes to get opportunities to play collegiate sports because they have the best academic and physical preparation and mental preparation to be transformational student athletes.
Well, the people really want to know what's on your mind. They go to Substack. Talk about the Substack before I answer this main question. What is the Substack?
I'm on the Illinois record with a friend of mine, Max Rice, who asked me to contribute to their Substack publication. It's called the Illinois Record, and I write a couple of pieces here and there when I feel compelled to, and there are things that I want to kind of put out there in the universe in terms of well-written political commentary. And so you can find me at the Illinois Record on Substack.
Well, LeAlan Jones, this is why we're on the show today. What is on your mind?
Oh man, it's great to talk to you. I sat there and I thought about our discussion previous to the election, and you mentioned that you said, hey, let's try to get you on in the new year. And I thought, wow, we'll have the inauguration next week of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was reelected after a very interesting political season, and I said, hey, let me give Mark a call and see what we can talk about on his podcast.
Well, go right ahead, sir.
I mean, what do you think? I think about our last discussion and how bad things were on the local level and how much worse it's gotten when we look at Mayor Brandon Johnson and his inability to administrate as the mayor without, still trying to be a protester.
Yeah, I like to talk. I don't like to talk about current events too much, only in the context of what guessing what's going to happen.
It's not Mark is not a current event if you really look at it. This has been an ongoing discussion for years. It's just now that it's being taken more seriously when you look at the fact that, these teachers are really they're really taking advantage. And I think it's never been more evident than with this contract negotiation with a mayor that was principally sponsored by the people he's negotiating a contract with for. Very, very unique.
Well, President Donald Trump, if you will, became a lame duck president when he became president. And some people will argue that Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago is a lame duck mayor. Who knows? So I always tell people behind the scenes and on the podcast, there are certain things that's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. And so what could really spook people? This recession has been coming for the past 10 years or some kind of silliest war out of the blue or some natural disaster. Who knows? And that's the whole thing about being president or mayor. When the crazy stuff jumps off, that makes you a better mayor or better president. What could Brandon Johnson do, and what could President Trump do to be a good president, a good leader, just a leader of the country, leader of the city of Chicago, if you will, for Mayor Brandon Johnson?
I think it's really unique. I mean, when we look at the mayor and you talk about natural disasters, it's hard not to talk about the response to the fires in Los Angeles County and not bring into question the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass, and just how underprepared they seem to be at dealing with something that many people have predicted within local government there. And then to look here in Chicago, where you have this massive amount of debt in a very inflationary environment, in the city of Chicago, and somewhat within the state of Illinois. And these are basically the last really true blue states in the union. If you look at Chicago, if you look at Illinois, it's the only blue state that was surrounded by red this past presidential cycle. And if you look at California, it's been one of the most it's the largest state in the union in terms of population, and it's a blue state. And you're looking at their local management of government, and is this a lot to be desired?
Well, people want perfection. It's like we saw President Trump during the pandemic last year, and I don't know if he got a high grade for handling the pandemic.
Not last year. Last year.
Wait. Excuse me. That's why you write for Substack and I don't. And last administration, if you will, and if you will, the Trump one, if you will. I don't think he did a good job, if you will, as far as the pandemic. But then again, who could? I think Lori Lightfoot did okay, but could have done better. But no one has a script on this kind of stuff. We know Mayor Johnson it's a cold weather city that's losing population, and of course it's a city that's broke, if you will. And so I don't see him having a plan that's going to set the town on city of Chicago on a good path for the next 10, 20, 30, 100 years. I don't see that plan. What do you think?
I think when you look at COVID and you mentioned Lori Lightfoot, something just popped in my head. Do you remember when we didn't really know what COVID was? And there were calls of people not to visit Chinatown, to not stigmatize the what we come to find out was COVID. And Lori Lightfoot, she went to Chinatown, and she went there and said that we shouldn't want to stigmatize them, Chinese people, because of what we found out to be COVID, and how wrong she totally was. And nobody ever went back and called her out for that, but it didn't matter because she didn't get reelected anyway. And I think she didn't get reelected because Trump was no longer in office, and a lot of her politics were around being anti-Trump, which is essentially the same playbook that Brandon Johnson is trying to use now in terms of being anti-Trump, and thinking he's going to be able to draw on the same sentiment to support the illegal migrants here that are going to more than likely be deported if the Trump administration has its way with the border czar Tom Homan. But when we look at Chicago, when we look at Cook County, I think we are very close to an implosion on the same level that they're dealing with in Los Angeles, here within Cook County, within the state of Illinois. And we're going to find out very shortly after the president's inauguration how reckless the local Democrats are based upon their natural disaster. And that's going to be, how they've mismanaged local government.
Yeah, sometimes I enjoy watching on the internet these videos of somebody's. It's usually a dude, of course, a man who's saying America is in decline and the coming economic collapse is going to be worse than 1929. All this kind of stuff. I love that. I don't call it the doom scrolling.
You're a doom and gloom guy.
Oh yeah, I see the glass half empty every day, and so I like that kind of stuff because it's entertainment on one level, but. The point is that when you're President Trump, of course, he has his own unique style. That's why he's president again. But sometimes you do have to own your failures and own your successes. And that's where real leadership comes from. But the real thing for me is that the masses are asses. And believe me, I'm one of the masses. I'm one of the proletariat. I got this. And so but the masses are asses. Most people are not really well versed in foreign policy or economic policy or any kind of policy, man. You know what I'm saying? And so they are easily duped and misled, or those in power really not give them the real deal because maybe they can't handle the truth. I don't know. Am I babbling? Keep going, LeAlan Jones.
I don't think so. I think it's a very cogent assessment of what we're dealing with here in a modern society that has access to so much information, while people not really having the ability to process that information. So when you started, I guess your insight, you communicated the fact that you don't mind hearing about the doom and gloom. It's entertainment, but it's only market-based activity. You can pretty much understand what a president's or what leadership is going to be able to do being able to understand what are the market forces that they're going to have to navigate through. I mean, at the very beginning of the Biden administration, I explained to a lot of people that didn't want to listen because it's not something you hear people talk about. But I said, you were going to experience a great deal of inflation under the Biden administration. And somebody would say, well, why would you make that assessment at the beginning of the Biden administration if there was going to be, a lot of inflation? Well, if you recall, Trump had allocated so much spending, new spending, which was essentially borrowing to deal with the COVID response. During his administration, he sent the checks out with his name on it, and they pumped a lot of liquidity into the market. And so, when you pump $1 trillion into the economy, it's going to take time to cycle through. And so when Trump lost, the Biden administration, they needed to show that they had command of the situation, which means that they were going to introduce more spending and use COVID as the impetus to do so. And that money from the Trump administration was still working itself through the economy. So by the time you get the Biden administration that came in with new debt being added that was being mass spending in response to COVID, by the time those things worked out within the first 24 months of the Biden administration, you saw a surge in inflation because there was just too much liquidity in the market, and you had too much money tracing too few goods, which drove up prices. And so that's something that was obvious to anybody that kind of observes these things and has a general fundamental view of government spending and how that's going to be reflected in the marketplace. So here we are at the beginning of the Trump administration, and I don't see it as all doom and gloom, but I do see it as transformational.
Yeah, I'm not an economic expert, economic professor, but I do listen to Marketplace, Marketplace Radio on NPR, marketplace.org. You can listen to it. I like listening to that kind of stuff. Give me some, at least a cursory understanding of these things. So, and they like talking about, of course, there is not just them, anybody can say this stuff. There's the economy. And there is your economy. And people get that mixed up sometimes. There's a stock market and there's economy. And so I think people have to understand if they can. I didn't understand this 30, 40 years ago. You have to figure out your economy in the context of being in the United States. If you know that I cannot live on my paycheck to paycheck job, either you're going to have to get another job that pays well, or get some education or training to get another job, or start your own business, or a little side hustle so you can bring in more income. It's up to you. It's up to your personality. You want to do it or don't want to do it. I'm a lazy person. I don't do it. The other one is that you do have to understand that the stock market is going to crash at some point. It crashes sometime, they say, really bad, 2 or 3 times in a 100-year cycle, whatever, in 100 years. So these things are going to happen. But you know that no matter what happens, if you dollar cost average, if you can save some money, and a lot of people can, remember, most Americans are just doing this fine. Half of all Americans are doing okay. The other half is struggling on their ass. So you got to figure out, are we doing okay? Are we struggling on our ass? And what is the strategies for my personal economy in the context of the larger economy? Go ahead and tell me I'm wrong or right.
No, I think what you're talking about is more credible insight. When you look at the city of Chicago, there is an overconcentration of people who have living wage jobs that are government employees that may not be necessary. And I think that's at the heart of the debate with the Chicago Teachers Union and the negotiations that are going on right now for their contract over the next 5 years. I think when we talked last on the podcast, I explained that Chicago Public Schools has become a jobs program as opposed to being something that has a public mandate to educate young people so that they can be viable participants in the marketplace. And so I think that issue now is going to creep over into the county. And if you go to the Substack that I sent you that I wrote, and I talked about the dine and dash economics at Cook County in Cook County, that is only being prompted by the fact that Sheriff Tom Dart, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart, talked about the fact that they're not going to be administrating the electronic monitoring program that Tony Pretwinkle has relied upon to make sure that the county budget has come in balanced during most of her tenure. And I think that as she is going to have to ask, what is she going to do going into the 2026 midterms when she's going to be up for reelection at nearly 80 years old, and a county that is going to be responsible for managing a Cook County jail system that is going to have to deal with a larger population, and a larger population with less than adequate people, I think, to work for the Cook County Department of Corrections, and dealing with the surge of people that you're going to be dealing with because of crime that have been put on electronic monitoring, which has contributed to the violent crime issues in the city of Chicago and the surrounding suburbs.
Let's end this podcast, so let's wind it down talking about Chicago and, well, the state of Illinois, Chicago, if you will, and the state of California. The state of California,
and Cook County government.
Of course, you the man. You're gonna have the last word on this one. The California, I ain't been out there in over 20 years, but Northern and Southern California is a beautiful, beautiful area. But they got their issues. I mean, environment issues, high costs, high taxes, all that kind of stuff. So there are people who say, "I'm out of here. I'm leaving California and going to Texas or somewhere else." Illinois has a similar problem since that we don't have the best weather in the world, and that's really one of our big problems here in Illinois. We don't have the best weather, and so for people like, I'm leaving here for better weather and lower taxes. Okay, and so the whole thing about whether you're in Chicago, Illinois State, or Cook County, and California is like, how do we bring the job that will keep people here? Well, we don't have to tax the populace to death and force them, the rich or the poor. Because you tax the poor too much, you tax the poor rich too much, they leave town. How would you, if you run to California, state of Illinois, how can you make those states, especially Illinois, vibrant without taxing the people, overly taxing the folks?
You're going to have to, what you're saying is the obvious. You're going to have to look at the mandates that have created entitlement via public spending, which has been education, which has been corrections, which is interesting, right? Because you would think if the education system was doing its job, it would not create an industry that needed policing or incarceration. So in essence, all of these, mandates that are being funded by local units of government, education and public safety, those have become the last bastions of the local economies. Because think about it, if you cut spending right now in the public schools, you would really just be cutting things back to pre-COVID levels. Because you got to remember, Chicago public schools, they ended up increasing their staff during COVID because they ended up having the money from the allocation of the Biden administration, which drove up the inflation. So if you just wanted to say, can we get back to pre-COVID levels, that would be huge, because we still have an economy that is responding to COVID, even though COVID has not been an issue within the last 4 to 5 years. And then that leads you to question, well, if they don't want to do that, then they have to create another crisis to justify a new round of liquidity that's going to deal with the debt that they've accumulated, dealing with an issue that has already been solved. So, if you just look at the fact, you're going to have to cut government spending. There's nothing else to say about it. You're going to have to cut government spending, but it's going to be difficult to sell the public, because many of the people that would lose their jobs are people that are reliant on government spending. But let's think about this, Mark. Think about all of the Walgreens and Walmarts and the big box retailers, as they call them, that have been closed up in the city of Chicago. Right? So why? Because people have adjusted their spending to buying things online. So instead of you going to a physical building to get your merchandise, you're ordering these things and they're coming right to your front door. So the economy is shifting, and government is not shifting as fast as the economy, and that's why they're burdening taxpayers in the way that they are, because they don't want to take into account that government is too big for the modern economy. But government is the largest employer in most local economies.
I can't thank you enough, LeAlan Jones, for being my guest. I know you may have a few more words. Give some closing comments. Say whatever you want.
No, I just really appreciate it. And that's why I wanted to follow up with you. I think it's going to be really sad for the African American community because many of the people that the community relies upon to frame a proper analysis, they have become so Trump deranged that they think that they can afford to sit around the next 4 years and be antagonists to the Trump administration, absent of an agenda that's reflective of the post-Trump economy. And so I'm really troubled by that. And I think that incompetence and the lack of anybody demanding them have a larger response than being an antagonist to President Trump, they're going to end up putting the constituency that relies on them to have a proper framework and analysis of what the community should be focusing on. We're going to find the African American community, probably in a worse state than we were under Jim Crow when you take into account the macroeconomic and geoeconomic things that are happening and how that's going to impact us here in the United States of America. Essentially, Africa is poised to be in a better position where when we talk about slavery, well, Africa is in a position right now where they're in a better position to respond to colonialism and slavery than we are to neoliberalism in the United States of America.